Hey class, this is the video lecture for Thursday, April 16th. We're going to talk about objectivity in the news. Hope everybody is doing well. If you guys have questions about group projects, please email me. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. So here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. You probably heard this already. The basis of our governments being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. And were it left for me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the later. So what is this saying? This is Thomas Jefferson's opinion that when the U.S. was started, after they gained independence from Britain, newspapers were so important that he'd rather have newspapers than a government. And they fought for that. So they recognize how important were the newspapers were. That's how we have the First Amendment, which you all learned in Mass 1. We'll go over a little bit here. So just to recap from news, in the early days, the news media was about basics. News spread via word of mouth. During the Roman Empire, governments transferred written accounts via people long distances, literally people running along paved roads from one post to the other, spreading it. Fast forward quite a bit to the invention of the printing press in 1456, which is attributed to Johannes Gutenberg, and you have the beginning of the mass dispersion of media, of information, i.e. news. Fast forward again to the 1920s, and we see some of the early developments in news media as professional journalism standards were created and adapted. So what is the fourth estate? Why is journalism called the fourth estate? And what are the other three estates? So if you don't know, the three estates are judicial, executive, which is the president, and executive, which is Congress. Those are written as part of our laws and part of our government, but part of that's central to our government that's not written in the laws is the fourth estate. And as we know, the checks and balances keep all three, the Supreme Court, president, and Congress from overriding each other. But they're basically saying the fourth estate, the newspapers, help give checks and balances to all of those as well. And you can see this all the time, how they were reporting and writing, and we'll learn through this lesson. So the freedom of the press, the First Amendment of the Constitution. Even with this in mind, we must remember, very importantly, the press is owned by media companies, and all the goals of media companies are to make money through ads. So you're gonna watch a video at the end that's really gonna explain this and go into how this happened. But just tell you, people always talking about the heyday of journalism and how it went down. There's some reasons behind that. One of the reasons is let's take it back 30 years. You had to sell your car. You had to rent your apartment. What are you gonna do? Even 20 years. How would I sell my car? I would have to go to the newspaper. I remember when I was younger, my dad was trying to buy a car. He would literally go to the newspaper every day. I don't know if you guys remember this from your parents. Would go through, if they're looking for a job, they would go through the newspaper, they'll sit at the table, looking all day, circling, I'm going to call this number. And people used to pay $100 or however much amount for that ad. So imagine if people putting thousands of dollars into those ads. So what happened? In the early 2000s, Craigslist came around. So I want to sell my car. Why am I going to pay $100 to put in the newspaper? Craigslist is doing it for free. Sorry, I have a little fly here. Right? So newspapers lost thousands and thousands of dollars. At the same time, there's a lot of discussion. Shouldn't have the newspapers adapted? Couldn't they have made their own Craigslist type listing and get the money from them? Yeah, they should have. But the thing with media companies, I don't know if you were in my other class or we spoke about this in our class, Kodak, they didn't want to adapt fast enough to film. So give me 1 second. I'm going to pause here. Let's pause share. Sorry, guys. Before everything locked down, I got a new plant and has some tropical plant to try to make my room a little more lively. Anyway, so now people are not paying to do the newspapers. They're doing the Craigslist for free. They're saving money. So this is costing newspapers thousands of dollars. They should have adapted. They didn't. Also, the newspaper ads are changing. Everything's changing because of the internet. So before this, in the heyday, newspapers had lots of money, lots of funds, And most important, very importantly, they were owned by families. It was always like one rich family owned local newspapers. When things started to go bad, guess what? Big corporations wanted to buy them. And big corporations saw they could make even further, they can make money off of them. So the families cashed out. Okay, things are going bad. We want to get out of the news business. We're going to get out. So literally went from like dozens of rich, wealthy families who lived in the community, who actually cared about the community, selling it to a handful of corporations, Gannett, Hearst, Advanced Media. Some of these are owned by hedge funds, and they care about the bottom profit. They don't care about democracy or whatever. And it's a business, not really, it's protected by the First Amendment, but it's not part of the government to stop this. So what they do, they condense, this is what they've done in Connecticut with Hearst papers. They've literally bought majority of the papers in the state. So instead of having different people, instead of in each office having copy editors, they'll have one central hub with copy editors. What the copy editors, every time there's acquisition, they have more work to do. They don't get paid more. Now we don't need to have each reporter for a town. We can have one reporter for a few towns. We don't need to have one breaking news reporter for Bridgeport and New Haven, which are both big cities. Sorry for a cough drop. So they're sharing. So if I subscribe to the New Haven Register, now I'm opening the paper and I'm getting Bridgeport news. And like, where's the things that I really care about? Top of that, we're getting wire sources. It's less and less about me. So they've created a down cycle where people are, I'm subscribing. I don't care. I can go to a local blog for free online. I don't need to subscribe to this. It's just a downward cycle and they can't figure it out. New York Times has figured it out by subscription based, and that has increased their stock market price, and they're doing really well. But majority of newspapers in America are doing really bad. Let me know your opinions. What's the local newspaper? Have you seen the local newspaper where you live go down? Do your parents still subscribe to it and things like that? Sorry, I'm going way ahead. I need to move my face here. People often complain that news isn't objective enough. We saw this with our change in media papers, where a lot of the interview subjects were referring to like the Cronkite days, where, you know, you got the news straight ahead. A democracy needs a continuous flow of accurate information about society and the political environment to make good decisions when they vote. How do we know anything that Bernie Sanders was going for, anyone Biden or Trump was going for, if there was no newspapers before social media? We wouldn't. We would have to go to town halls. We wouldn't really know that much information. Same thing with the coronavirus. Can you imagine if this was before the internet, or if there were no newspapers around to cover the coronavirus? How bad it would be. We need the news to give us accurate information. And a journalist's job is to present the most credible facts on all sides, so we don't violate the public's trust and exploit audiences. And people get confused with opinionated news, such as Fox News and MSNBC. They think that regular newspapers are exploiting the public's trust. As we'll see, there are ways that things are shaped. There are a lot of things that go into writing an article. For the most part, people are not. They're dealing with condensed budgets, and you'll see in the video at the end, limited time, limited resources. They're cutting the newsroom. I remember when I worked, where was I? I think it was in the Star, and when I went to NJ.com, the Star Ledger had over 300 employees. That was when they only covered the city of Newark. NJ.com, which covered the whole state, had 100 employees. So they're doing more with less. They're all about clicks and things like that. I will see in a little bit. So anyway, news has to be objective, but people argue, what is objectivity? So it's when we look at something from an all-knowing view in events. So it's sort of like God, or whatever God you believe in. It's looking from above. It can look down, but we can't be God and we can't see it all. So how do we include everything that's going on? So first thing, news is really chaotic. If you cover news, you have to report accurately out of chaos. Weird science journals, environmental impact reports, obscure laws, everything, and then you have to do it in a timely fashion. Here's an example in the breaking news that I used to do. So this was one of the biggest stories that I ever covered. I had probably went home like 1 a.m. and used to go home at 10. So what happened was Bridgeport, I don't know if you know Bridgeport's in Connecticut, it's not too far from us. Sorry, let me close all the pop-up ads here. This is another thing. All right, so there was a warehouse exploded. There was a huge fire. It was chaos. Nobody knows what's going on. And we just see the alerts. We have to run. We have to go figure out what's going on. And it's only me at night. Imagine, this is a story that should have required multiple reporters. Everybody had gone home. There's budget cuts. It's only me. I have to figure out what's exploding. Why did it explode? How bad is it? This is on top of the firefighters fighting the fire and the police department coordinating everything. I've never seen anything like this. I think I'll scroll through the pictures here. I think this was like end of world, like movie times, because what it was a perfume factory exploded and the barrels went shooting into the air. Some of the homes nearby caught fire. It was a massive warehouse. It was like a 6-alarm fire. People were tweeting photos that they could see it like miles away from the highway. They were worried what was going on. Blocks of the neighborhood were evacuated and shut down. And the fire was so bad, it was like almost like you were in a volcano because the ash was flowing down. So imagine all this chaos. They're moving us back. I have to fight my way through. I have to figure out, I have to interview people. Did anybody die? And I have to do it all before a certain time. And it gets really, really chaotic. It's a skill that you learn how to do over time. You know who to call. You know who's going to have the information right away. You know which firefighters, because there's a lot of laws as well. Firefighters and police, because of things that have happened in the past, they will not talk to you individually. As you keep showing up to the events, some of them will. They'll recognize you. They'll say, oh, I know this guy. He's fair. He's going to, maybe they won't give their name. We'll talk about that later. It's really hard, and we have to do it on a time constraint. So I need to know what's going on and how do I present this to readers. I don't even know myself, so I have to figure all that out in a timely fashion. And a journalist, we can't see anything. It's funny because people especially when I was worked active as a journalist, people think that I was like Google, and I would say, I don't know this. Please stop asking me. They think that I knew every single thing. So as journalists, we make decisions on what to put in and leave out. Maybe something about that big fire was not really that important, but there's other things that are really important. How many people were evacuated? What's going to happen to schools in the area the next day? Maybe that could be saved for a Monday morning article on the internet. And what we feel is most important, and what our editors think. Our editors shape a lot of our stories. They cut out stuff that we worked hard for. They help us. Sometimes we have crappy editors that just change our stories in the worst way and things like that. For the most part, they're good guys, good people. So here's my personal view. People always have this quote: there are two sides to every story. I think if you have a two-party story, it could change based on the number, because different stories have different parties. But on a two-party story, I think there's three sides. There's this person's side, there's this person's side, and then in the middle is the truth. So my job as a journalist is not to convince you which side is the truth. My job as a journalist is to give you both sides, even that third side that's hard to get, and let you figure out that answer. My reporting is not to skew one way or the other. It's to show you, hey, this is what's A, this is what's B. You choose what's right. And good journalism does that. It gives you the negative. I shouldn't even say negative or positive. It gives you one side or the other. And you have to give them enough to do so. You have to provide all the facts, and as we'll see in the rest of the lesson, different ways of presenting the article. We also have to decide, how do we tell the story? So let's look at a clear-cut story that I'm going to show you here. Let's present from different perspectives. I was at Internet Newsday, and Derek Jeter was retiring from the Yankees, right? So you get used to this. You kind of figure out where to find the people. So, okay, sports fans, they shop at Modell's. Sports fans, they're going to be at a bar. So as a lowly intern, there's one person writing the story. You go out, you got to find the people in the street, the man on the street interviews, who's going to give me quotes about Derek Jeter. So this is imagine you're going to a store like a Walmart, and I'm just standing outside. Excuse me, what do you think about Derek Jeter? That was basically my job, and it was crazy. People were like, leave me alone. I want to go home. I love Derek Jeter. Like, I don't want to give my name. We'll see that later. So my editor at the time, she was a woman. She was a very good editor, very strong editor. I got her some quotes. I hated doing this. She's like, you have no women. I want to hear opinions from women, from bystanders. I was so pissed. I was like, why? What does this have to do with anything? Like, maybe at the time on my biased view, I assumed most sports people are male. But she said, go back. And it took me longer. I probably was outside Modell's for like more than an hour. But I learned a very valuable lesson that made my reporting better. You're not to be one-sided with people you interview. Not just white males. You have to get a diverse array of people from different backgrounds. You have to get Latino. You have to get LGBTQ, even for routine stories. It makes your reporting way better if you do that. And I appreciate her for busting my chops and making me do this, because I learned, and my reporting has been better since that. We always have to remember the difference between news and entertainment. while news can be entertaining, always remember that it's based on fact. So I just wanted to show you, sorry about that. All right, I don't know how to get back to my, okay, we go. Um, this is an interesting story. So literally my job on Saturday, there's nothing going on, was to go in the office, listen to police radio, look at Facebook, Twitter. We have Hootsuite that has everything combined, and look for news. So part of the thing I would do, one of our editors told me, let me, again, with these crazy pop-up videos, and let me sidetrack a little bit. Why do they do those videos that pop up? Videos get more money. So I already looked at that video, looked at it for 5 seconds. They're going to get some money off of it. It's annoying, but that's the little tricks they do. So anyway, going back to my story, I used to read the obituaries. I used to scan the obituaries because somebody told me, sometimes you'll find little local celebrities or you'll find crazy things in the obituaries. So this lady in the obituary, what she did was she put a joke. She was an 83-year-old, like, suburban Connecticut lady. And she wrote her own obituary before she died. She wrote that she died of hypothermia after her dog ate her socks at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro. Obviously, she's not, Mount Kilimanjaro is one of the highest mountains in the world. You need oxygen to get to the top. There's no way this 83-year-old lady is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. So it was an interesting story. And I found that we have a database we can reach people. So I reached out to the family. I found out that she was a jokester. She was a prankster her whole life. And this was her ultimate prank, to like have people look at her obituary and say she's nuts, but that's her. That's who she was. And, so it was a cool little story that I did, and it got picked up by the AP, and it was republished all over the US. News is triggered by actual events. There's an old saying, when bad things happen, it's good for news. So we could probably be going in through the worst thing that we ever experience in our lives, or will experience in our lives, hopefully, a pandemic. How many of you are just glued to the news now? Or not glued, but you're watching news way more. I know my news consumption has increased dramatically. I'm reading New York Times like an hour or more a day. I'm reading New York Post. I'm reading Daily News. There's some days that I skip because I just want to break from the bad news, but I'm reading way more. And think about the worst events. When you have hurricanes, when you have September 11th, excuse me, it's when the news is in overdrive. So people are hungry for information. And remember, the news is just stories about the events. Now we can have a play-by-play with social media. So there are constraints that journalists have to deal with when we create when we retell these events. There's deadlines, there's resources, and there's perspective. Even when we try to give the most accurate information, it's super hard to do. So first thing first is deadlines. So what's the deadline? Same thing like your paper. Your papers are due. I don't know when the last paper. So let's just say theoretically tomorrow. Papers are due April 16th, 11:59 p.m. So maybe you might email it to me late, right? You might get 5 points off. You might say, hey, this happened. Can I get an extension? But guess what with the newspaper? The paper is going to print at 12 midnight. If you don't turn something in, the paper is going to have a blank in it, and that's a screw up. So you can ask for an extension for bigger stories, not timely stories. But even the best journals have gotten fired for missing deadlines. Deadlines are sacred in journalism and news. And it's because papers go to print every time a certain day. It takes time to print the papers and then ship everywhere. How do you think you get that newspaper in the morning? That process starts, and we'll look at the process here in a little bit, starts at when you wake up, you see the news. Tomorrow, your newspaper in front of your door, if you see it like at 5 or 6 a.m., that whole process started the day before at 8 a.m., 9 a.m. at a meeting. So their daily papers usually have a deadline of like 11 p.m. So depending, a writer's deadlines are much earlier. Why? So my job for this today is to cover something, right? So I have to go into town. So even though the deadline to print is 11, my editor still needs to see it. They need to make revisions. Okay, you need to go back and interview somebody else. You need to double check your facts. And then it has to go to the copy editors, which do more stylistic things. So while my editor might look for more of the way I'm formatting it and who I interviewed, the copy editors are using a fine-tooth comb and looking at AP style, the way you spell things. I remember one copy editor, he was a pain. There's a lot of curmudgeons in journalism, older people, but they'll teach you a lot. And he always told me something that he hated. He would shout it out in the newsroom. The first annual, um, I think that's what it was, the first annual event. And then it's like, well, the first anniversary, like it was a thing, like, okay, there's no first anniversary, you need the first one, and then the second one is the anniversary. It was something like that. I'm probably confusing you right now. But he was really like curmudgeon about it. He was also a stickler about when he said police turned themselves into, like a suspect turned himself into police, which he said, okay, they magically did magic and they turned into a cop, which he wanted you to reword it different. And you see those things I was annoyed at, but I remember those things, and it made me a better reporter. So moving back to deadlines. So deadlines prevent journalists from gathering all the facts and the complete picture. Remember, if we have to gather things by 5, people want to get back to me. Oftentimes you have to make do with what you have. The paper needs a story, there's an assigned space for it. Many times where I wanted to add more, call more people, or rewrite, there was a deadline. That's it. That's what I have to give. There's no way I can leave something blank. I'd rather have a less than perfect article than have a blank thing, unless I ask my editors, hey, can I have another hour? Sometimes, like, hey, this guy's going to get back to me. Can I have another hour? Maybe he will or won't. You don't know, but if the other hour could make a difference. So 11 p.m. So this is the new thing with news, with the internet. So there's an 11 p.m. deadline. So if a fire breaks out at 2 a.m., so let's say my deadline is, this is video I'm recording Wednesday at like around 9, right? So there's 11 p.m. deadline, the paper goes to print. So tomorrow morning at 2 a.m., if a fire breaks out, that won't be in Thursday's paper. That would be in the paper on Friday. It's already old, right? By the morning of Thursday, there's a fire already went out. People have already been affected and so forth. It would probably be in Friday's paper as a smaller article saying, okay, yesterday, early morning, blah, 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 this happened. Thankfully for the internet, that's not really an issue. If something happens, it can go up right away. But at the same time, the paper makes news old. Even with magazines and week magazines, which are weekly papers, there are deadlines. And while it isn't new, these stories are still important. They often do things. Magazines often take a deeper or fresher look at things. Even radio, TV, and internet might seem there aren't deadlines, but there are. Radio, you turn to 1010 wins. It says whatever, every 20 minutes you get the news. So they have a deadline themselves. They have to update things every 30 minutes. Maybe they have a morning deadline, let's say 6 a.m., where they package everything, or every hour, something like that. TV every 30 minutes for an update. And once stories already are submitted, it's out of date because things keep happening. So look at the coronavirus. If you report right now how many people have died, maybe in an hour, fresh stats from Italy who will come in and the number has changed. Maybe when I report it today, it might say, I don't know the actual numbers. I know it's around here already. We have 100. There's 1.9 million people affected, but within this 10 minutes that it's already submitted, maybe that number has pushed to 2 million. And that's a milestone. So things are always happening, and that you can't keep up with the actual print newspaper. What they do is, let's say I go to work. If you work as a journalist now, you go to work, you write the story, you put it on the internet, bam. And then what you do, you have to update it all day. Okay, I got to call the commissioner of police, tell me what really happened. I got an exclusive interview with the guy's family who was shot. And then it'll see updated here, or we'll just change it, whatever. And then we'll use the print deadline from that piece, whatever time it's due, whatever's on the internet at that point. So resources. So even the biggest media sources have budgets, right? There's constraints on money. There's a limit on resources. And there's never enough resources to cover all the day's events. Editors must decide what to cover and what not to cover. How do they decide this, right? Usually works like this. So when I worked at Newsday, Connecticut Post, NJ.com, they all got together at 2 meetings, the morning meeting and the midday meeting. They discuss ideas and what to cover. Oh, this old lady in Patchogue is turning 100 today, and she is the oldest lady on Long Island. We need you to cover that story today. We're going to assign that story to Pinto because he covers that town, right? Okay. They give him 30 inches, blah, blah, blah. Send the photographer over. No, actually, we don't need a photographer. We're stressed on photographers. Let him take pictures with his iPhone. Then they go meet again in the late afternoon, let's say 2 o'clock. There's a big fire. He has to cancel. He can't do the celebration of the old lady. So he just don't go there. We'll use a press release. We'll do something later in the week, maybe in the Sunday paper where nobody really cares. Like the weekend papers where nobody looks at in the back. and usually pitch to your editor and wait to see after the meeting, hey, so and so, I have a really good idea for you today. One of my sources came through and said that there's another person who is turning 110 in East Patchogue, and that's really the oldest living person. Whatever. They go to the meeting, they advocate for you. We can't have all the reporters in the meeting. Reporters hardly go to the meeting unless they have a big story or they're like an older person that's been there for a while. And like I showed you an example, this can change from morning to midday in a matter of minutes. Organizations need to think where they will send people. So years ago, Newsday and every other paper had bureaus everywhere. This was the heyday of journalism, and I wish I was alive for that time so I could be stationed in Mexico City or somewhere else or whatever. Newsday doesn't have anybody overseas anymore. There's a very famous Newsday reporter, and I think he passed away, but I had spoken to him and done something about him. He was stationed in the Middle East, and he was one of the first reporters. He actually won the Pulitzer Prize for his book talking about the heroin trail, which they went to Afghanistan. They saw the poppy fields and everything. Newsday does not have anybody in the Middle East. The big papers do. The really big papers, New York Times, Washington Post, but they've cut back. Instead of having people in every country, they might have somebody in one region. So instead of having somebody in Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, they might have one South American person covering the whole continent. So AP does have people everywhere. They use local sources. Reuters does use local people. And they do have people everywhere because news organizations pay a lot of money to join these things. Often what they'll do is for example, the AP will put a big story about something. Let me use something that I saw today. New saliva coronavirus testing to launch in New Jersey, right? So the AP will publish that story, and what the local paper would do is they'll send another reporter like me out to the clinics here and see when is that coming in Long Island, when is that coming to a clinic near me, and things like that. They'll localize the national story. Yeah, so I said that I wish they would send me to countries. That would never happen. It could happen if you secure your own grants or funding, and if the paper agrees to the term. So usually, before I left journalism, my goal was to keep writing immigration articles and get a fellowship. There was a really good program. One of my former grad school classmates actually went. And what they do is they give you $5,000 and they send you to a workshop for 2 weeks, and they give you like a month to go. But your newspaper that you work for has to agree to give you the time off, and it has to be relevant to the local area. So for example, if I was in Newsday, MS-13 is a big problem in Brentwood, I would say I'm proposing to go to El Salvador for a month and find the local causes of the MS-13 problem. And the company would say, here's $5,000. Newsday would give me the time off, and when I come back, my story will be published in Newsday. So there's a lot of funding. There's a lot of ways if you want to get into journalism and look for those big stories to do that. But sadly, the companies don't have money, hardly ever have money to do it on their own. So we also need to look at perspective. It's when you think about news and how it should be presented. Nowadays, though, sadly, informing the public is second to attracting people and getting them to come back for more. It's all about the hits. It's all about the clicks, right? It's all about the views. That's where they get paid. So would you think this would happen if newspapers were supported and paid for by the government? Maybe not. If it's part of the government, they don't need to monetize it crazy and make a profit, right? But there's some privacy concerns. So in the last few years, New Jersey has added a budget as part of the state budget to help local news. And this article, I'm not going to show you the article. Basically, the article says that people are scared of what would happen. I haven't really followed up with it. It's still too new, but they were worried that New Jersey. So let's say New Jersey has a grant for $5 million, and I'm in a small town in Edison, and I give that paper $100,000. But they uncover some dirt and say, hey, you've uncovered something about the governor, right? So there's some concerns that maybe the state government can say, no, we're going to pull that money, don't put that story. They've made promises that they wouldn't do that. And we don't know yet. It's still too new to examine, but it sounds like an interesting and promising profit model, government pro model. There's also nonprofit and philanthropy journalism. What is that? So I don't know if you guys know ProPublica. Sorry, I'm going too much ahead. The way they run is they get grants, they have donors, they have big funders, they have drives, and they don't have to make money. Their goal is to give the best value for the source, the best value for the dollar. And so they do a lot of hard hitting journalism. They have the time and energy and resources. And ProPublica is really good. It started off small, but they've taken some of the best journalists from the New York Times and Washington Post, because this is like a dream job to work at. If you're passionate about one subject, ProPublica has the resources. You don't have to do those daily little crime stories or tidbits or town stories. You can actually work on a story in ProPublica for months and make a deep, good impact. So here's 10 times that actually happened. You may not have known these stories. Oh, and now there's a paywall. Let's see if I can open it. Oh yeah, this is from the ProPublica. Oh, I think they have a paywall. Let's see. So here's one story that they did. I'm sorry I can't show you the guys that. A guy was wrongfully convicted of murder. They looked into it. He had a new hearing, and he was cleared of his chemical record. Anything dealing with the courts takes lots of time and energy. You have to go through records. You have to request records. You have to interview police officers who are hesitant. You have to pressure them. You have to wait for you have to create freedom of information requests for records. They don't get back to you. The courts are blocking it. It takes forever. So, places like ProPublica have the resources and time and can do things like that, thankfully. But news needs ads to survive. And the bigger the audience is, the more they can charge for ads. That's why it's all about clicks. If we have two papers and one has 1 million clicks a day versus 10,000 clicks a day, the one with 1 million clicks a day can charge more to put one of those automatic videos. They can charge theoretically, let's say $100 a day versus $10 a day. So it's all about the numbers. News organizations need to be careful that they don't run hard-hitting stories on their advertisers or audiences not to offend their advertisers. Yes, that does happen, right? This is the biggest advertiser, and a lot of big organizations, if you open a local newspaper, you'll see it's hospitals, it's schools, colleges, it's the big companies there that are running ads. So here's something that happened when I worked at the Connecticut Post. One of the reporters found out that a male nurse was drugging and sexually abusing male patients after surgeries. And that was at St. Vincent's. And it found out that St. Vincent's they had found out about it and was hiding it. And there was a conversation between the reporter, advertisers, the editors, and the publisher. Publisher never is involved with day-to-day stuff. So the publisher's coming in, it's big. It was Connecticut Post's biggest advertiser. And they paid 5 or 6 digits, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think yearly or quarterly or something like that. And in this age, to lose that, remember that these newspapers are so constrained. To lose that is so bad. And I think they did pull. They pulled out a little bit, but they came back, like I think after a few months. And they settled the suit because guess what? The news knows about it, and they don't want to look bad. They want to change it around. And using the example from the book says that tobacco was underreported by newspapers for the harmful effects because all the ads they got. Even in TV, where ads were banned, it was underreported for fear of other affiliated companies will pull ads because these big corporations own everything. So Procter & Gamble, right? Let's say Procter & Gamble, I know for a fact they own Tide, and they own shampoo like Pantene. So let's say my newspaper, my TV station does an ad that Tide has something in it that's giving people cancer, right? Okay, so if I write that ad and Pantene Pro V is giving me tons of money, I might be scared to print that story because not only will I lose from Tide, I would lose from the other. So these corporations are fearful of what they publish and print for losing ads. Here's an example. Here's other examples. In 1996, oh, so today is the anniversary of the Titanic sinking in 1912. In 1996, CBS in Philadelphia was called out because they ran 9 stories about the Titanic. Why all of a sudden, almost 80, more than 80 years later, the news station in Philadelphia is running stories about the Titanic? I mean, maybe one story about the anniversary, but here's the reason why. They had a new show about the Titanic that was set to premiere on CBS. They're promoting their own thing, disguised as news articles. Just like ABC, they run lots of stories and events related to Disney movies, which Disney owns ABC. Journalists and news organizations always have to consider the two things, the one of the two. Should we give audiences what they want or what they need? Sometimes what people want is not what they need. Should I report on a critical issue? And this is a thing that you guys would realize. I didn't think it was a big deal when you get older and you are homeowners. This is contested in towns, like let's say the garbage budget, like things like that. People embezzling money from that is really big. So should I give an audit of this year's waste management budget in the small town of Patchogue? Or should I talk about the walking bear, right? People don't care about reading the nuisances of waste management budgets, but it could be affecting them, right? Maybe your taxes are going up because things are not getting, maybe your taxes are getting higher and your garbage collection sucks. So people should know about that, especially if they're tax paying homeowners. Guess what? They don't care. Maybe the older people do. They want to see the interesting, crazy stuff. And I don't know if I've ever showed you guys this. The Pedals the Walking Bear. So no, it's not a guy in a suit. This is an actual bear who has a paw injury and he cannot walk on 4 legs, so he walks up kind of human-like. So the thing in New Jersey, it's woodsy in the north. So every time it gets, like now, spring, the bears come out. We're cutting down the forest and building more homes. Obviously, we're encroaching into their land. So of course they're gonna come out, right? And it's a thing that happens every year, but people go ecstatic for this. You see a bear sighting, and I had to write all this. Pedals is a local celebrity. He was like huge. Like, look at the numbers here. Like 1 million, more than 1 million for a news organization. Like local papers to have 1 million something is big. People would click on this the most, and with the internet, we can see what people are clicking on automatically. I can check it in real time. We had dashboards to check what articles are trending. And you're gonna see in the video at the end, which is very funny, your whole day as a reporter nowadays will be skewed. Okay, I'm gonna write about this has really happened to me. I'm gonna go to the court to work on a murder trial to see what's going on. But guess what? Hey, the editor calls me. Pedal story's blowing up. Can you go to that town? Forget about the court. You can just catch up in the next court date, the next hearing, which is they usually last like 2 weeks or whatever. Just forget about that. That's not important, even though it's a big story. Go check in the town of Pedal. See what people are saying. Where is he at now? Because we can see the clicks. And sadly, those stories that for me matter the most about murder trials and murders don't have a lot of clicks, depending. So all journalists feel a personal responsibility. So they think we are the experts in what is important and have responsibility to inform public about significant events of the day. I strongly agree about this. We think about it. Older reporters have worked in the same areas for 20 plus years. They're experts in their coverage. They want to give people what they should care about. Another thing you should know, especially for local papers, these people have been working here for years and years without raises because of the way that the thing that I mentioned earlier and what you see in the video. So it was even sad to even attract a college person like me. I found out I was getting paid more at 35, which is not nothing, at my first reporting job, Connecticut Post, than copy editors who have been there for 20 years because their salary had gotten frozen. There's no raises. So you have to understand one thing about journalists. They really care about their job to get low pay. Most journalist people, they can leave. They can work for PR, get paid double. They can work for schools, get paid double. They can work for magazines or other places, get paid double. If they're there, they really care about how important their local paper and journalism is to society. And sadly, those people do leave. One of the reporters, Connecticut Post, she had kids. The insurance sucked. She had to pay so much. So she, fought hard and got hired for one of the main universities there. I don't blame her. She can't be getting paid $35,000 a year, has a house with 2 kids. The university is going to pay her probably at least double with better insurance. Maybe if she's there years, the kids could get free college, which is expensive. So that's what happens. That's why there's more PR people than there are journalists in the U.S. And again, I've already went over this. This is what's trending on Twitter and click potential. Another problem with journalists is writing the article is if you give too much information, you'll lose to audiences. Stories are always condensed and cut because of this. Even as a reporter, you hate this. You've done so much work. You've interviewed so much people. You've gone into the nitty gritty of the waste management budget. It's cut out. And it's like you put so much into it just to see half of the article show up. That's the way it is. You get over it. Sometimes you actually fight for it. Like, no, I did all this work. You're going to put it in. When you're starting off, it's not as easy. So as business managers, the newspaper owners want to monetize. They look for shocking things to attract people, the bear stories. An analysis of 13,000 items in 12 daily newspapers found those with strong market control had fewer items about the government or public affairs and had more about lifestyle or sports. That's why news puts so much resources on sports. High school sports are such a big thing. And it's insane. Sorry, guys, real quick. Let me just take this. It's insane, the tactic that I learned from working in newspapers. So what they do is they photograph proms. They photograph all these little sports. Why? And they put a huge gallery. So they send the photographer. In Connecticut Post, we had 4 photographers for a huge area. And if they were at sports games, it had to be something really big to pull them off. This is what they do. They put this huge gallery and they tell everybody there, or they make it, come see your kids. Are you at prom? So they know, okay, let's say you graduated 2 years ago from whatever high school in Long Island. I might be in Newsday. I want to see my photo. You're clicking through 100 photos. Your family members are doing it. Your fellow students are doing it. Your classmates are doing it. The staff at the school is doing it to see themselves. That generates a lot of clicks. It was the worst thing to do. I had to do proms. I hated it. And you know who also hates it? There's prom photographers who get paid lots of money and try to sell the packages at like the photo studios, and they hate that we're there. So going back to that stat, those newspapers that did better, had more entertaining stories, had shorter news pieces, had more personalities featured than leaders, had more gossip news, and had more, and their soft news is way up. And has this changed with Trump? It has, right? Some of those soft things, it's all about political news. It's all about politics, what's going on. We have more political news than ever, which is great, but what's the value of that news? It seems like the media circus is just following every little thing that Trump does. So let's say whatever paper has a staff of 10 people. I need Trump in the morning, one person, I need another person, blah, blah, blah. So instead of focusing on every little thing he does, why don't they focus, 2 people do his daily events, the rest do hard-hitting investigative journalism into his supposed whatever he's accused of being done wrong, right? So I usually have people raise their hand. Obviously, we can't do that. So tell me in discussion, do you think that journalists should focus on every little thing or focus on the big stuff, and what matters more? So when we look at the quality of journalism, there's 6 elements. First thing we have is fabrication. As I mentioned to you before, journalists really care about the news. There's no conspiracy theory to make up stories. Making up stories is death for you in your career. You're done. So journalists, we can't make up things about real events. While news can be entertaining and evoke emotion, it needs to be based on fact. Sometimes you read an article, it's not that great. When I first started, my articles were not that great. I had to do what I had to do. I couldn't reach people, but I'm not going to lie. Lying. If I worked at my first newspaper, Connecticut Post, right, and I lied about a couple articles, years later, let's say theoretically, if I had not gone into teaching and I got to the New York Times, whatever, 20 years later, and they trace it back, right, that I had lied on those articles in the Connecticut Post, I would get fired. So losing my $120,000, that's a starting salary for New York Times, $120,000. Losing my $120,000 reporting job for articles when I was younger, never. You can never recover. You can't bounce back from that. It's not like you get fired from a job, you can find another one. Your name is out there, you're screwed. So go with what you have. If you're not sure, don't include. Fabrication is career suicide, even the smallest thing. Not if, when it's found out, goodbye. So the famous journalism saying in newsrooms is, if your mom says she loves you, check it out. That means don't believe what she says, look for proof, and it's an exaggeration, but that's how you have to go by when you listen to people. You have to check it out. You have to cross your eyes. Sorry, dot your I's and cross your T's. So I don't know if anybody knows about Jason Blair. He was a mess. We're gonna go into it. Watch a short clip about him, who he was, and what did he do.
Jason Blair was a young man who was hired at the New York Times, perhaps without sufficient checking into his background and perhaps without sufficient preparation for a job as highly pressured and visible as working at the New York Times is, and assigned him at one point to do a big story a few years ago about a sniper who was killing people in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia. It turned out that one of his stories was seen by a reporter in San Antonio, Texas, who happened to know him. He had lifted some of that reporter's story. He was stealing her material. And so he didn't want to call attention to that. He thought he could get away with it. The reporter in Texas got in touch with Blair's editors at the New York Times, and that started an investigation. What the investigation showed was that some of Blair's reporting had been falsified, that Blair had not talked to some people that he claimed to have talked to, that he made up quotes that they never said. Jason Blair was making it up. Jason Blair was writing fiction. When the New York Times learned this, they were, of course, mortified, because the reputation of the paper depends on the reputation of the people who work for it. And those of us who have read the New York Times religiously for many years were quite surprised that a reporter of the New York Times would do this and got away with it for so long. In point of fact, there is no excuse for this. And I would say he is now, as far as I know, completely out of journalism. His career is over. There's a couple reasons why not to do this. In the end, it's a career end. So just from a practical perspective, you don't want to do it because you'll get caught. What Jason Blair did was wrong. The most important reason is that he misled 1 million New York Times readers and led them to believe things that were not true. And that fundamentally undercuts the purpose of a great daily newspaper, which is to get as close to the truth as one can get. What he should have done was he could have said, as reported by Ms. Hernandez in the San Antonio newspaper, and then quote her, give her credit, or paraphrase her. I do say to my students that, If any of you ever damages the reputation of the Newhouse School through what you do in the workplace, we will not forget it. If you develop bad habits at the school, then those bad habits will.
Okay, we don't need to see that part. So basically, he would made up things, and this is an interesting thing that I found, and I couldn't find the link. I learned it when I was in school. Jason Blair. So there was a story. There was a random guy killing people with a sniper rifle. So he claimed he made up a lie about something, and the person he claimed to have interviewed read the made up quote. So basically, it says like, let's see, who's in Jenna. Let's say I interviewed Jenna, and I said Jenna said on the night of blah blah blah, the sniper was in her backyard, and Jenna reads that and knows that it's wrong but doesn't say anything. So that's what happened with somebody that Jason Blair pretended to interview. And when they asked that guy, hey, if you read the news and you knew that you didn't like say that, why didn't you call the newspaper and speak up? And the guy actually said, I thought that's what reporters did. I thought they just made things up. So, you know, we have a whole new political system and society which always says fake news. I have family members on society who call legitimate news organizations fake news. But this stuff was going on. People have had these sentiments for a long time. So going into Trump has constantly presented lies and facts. We've seen the birth of a lot of websites that fact check. We have websites like PolitiFact. We have Snoops. There's other that check his lies and prove it is false. Still doesn't hurt him. The people that support him are still gonna support him. He turns things around. Not gonna politicize his class. So you guys can look at that in your own time. This isn't new. Politicians have always lied, have always stolen money. I'm not saying that Trump did, but politicians have been accused a lot of stealing money on the low, contractors and things like that. This happened with Mitt Romney when he ran against Obama in 2008. Mitt Romney was found to be lying. And when they confronted his campaign staff, the campaign staff said, we aren't going to let our campaign be dictated by fact checkers, which basically is by truth, which is really crazy. And now we're seeing an even a crazier time where, the nation needs a leader to present facts. And this is the first time ever that the person who's in charge of telling us what's going on in this crazy society is lying. And how do we combat that? I mean, I don't know if you guys have known about that, what's going on. Let me know in the discussion. Some news organizations, and even Trump has said that I have higher ratings for my live press conference, those daily press conferences, than football, which is, who cares, right? Like, people are dying. Like, we don't care about the ratings. We need somebody who will give us, good information. And looking at one of the things he said, he called the coronavirus a hoax early in the beginning. It doesn't hurt him. But how do we stop that? So again, certain news organizations have said, we're tired of this. We're not even going to air that. And I think there was one in Seattle. Personally, I think we need a lot of organizations to do that, but they're just not. So bias. The goal of journalism is to avoid bias. But everyone has bias. And what's bias and how does it affect you? Your life, your upbringings all influence your bias. We might have different biases from where we were born and raised. So for example, Eileen left and championed for the underdog, the poor, the immigrant, and things like that. My neighbor might be completely the opposite, right? He grew up in a different place. But I still need to present the other side. If I write an immigration article, I need someone who is against immigration, someone who's saying this is bad, right? Even though I want to write, my whole thing was writing immigration articles to show how, how sad it was people were coming here. I need to show somebody who's going to say, no, they're just coming to do this, who has a good argument for that. And one article I did, and sometimes you do this, if you're a really fair journalist, sometimes you even get your sources angry. So I have a lot of pro-immigration sources who help me and give me, people to interview. And one time I did a story that said, the numbers are not going up. Why are you guys clamoring for this? And they're like, oh, you shouldn't have wrote that. My job is, even though I advocate for this, my job is not to advocate, right? Maybe my personal sense. No, my job is to present both sides of the fact. And even that shows that the Homeland Security is doing something right or subjective right, against the pro-immigration people. That's my job, to show both sides. And even if it goes against what I personally believe in, no, you stick to the middle, that's it. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes bias might lead a reporter to leave something out. This is harder to recognize. So if you agree with a journalist when you read an article, you think there is no bias. But if you disagree with a journalist, you think more critical about the information. So there is a bias in not reporting important stories. So even leaving things out there's a bias. So like mentioned before, news can only cover a little bit of what's going on in a single day. And news managers are concerned with profit. They're concerned more with the profit than the First Amendment, right? And again, I've already said this so many times, there's no big conspiracy theory. The problem why news sucks is nowadays is because decisions are handed from the top. The top leans more towards money than anything. Um, I'll give you a crazy example. I don't know if you guys are tired of hearing my crazy examples. So we get these police reports from the Department of What's the Bus. We got a police report that cops aren't, and they noticed that the reports were a new form of marijuana called hash or dabs. It's a liquid, the gooey stuff. I forgot what the name is right now. It has many names. So my editors were like, "Oh, is this a new form of weed?" It wasn't really that new. It was going on for a long time. But they saw the trend. They wanted me to write a story about it. I wrote this big story talking about it, and they made it into a listicle. They took out a lot of the points that I made, and one of the points that I made was that yes, this is the thing with the marijuana is it's more potent, right? It's more potent than actually smoking the like from the leaf or the whatever. And so people would get really high and be hospitalized on it. So I put a thing, yes, if somebody who has never drunk liquor for the first time, instead of going for a beer, goes for the overproof vodka, yeah, they're going to be in the hospital too. They cut that out, and in the comments, they destroy me in the comments. And I don't know. I told them my editor something, but they had the final decision. And that's when I knew I didn't want to be with a company that was going to make my name look bad. Because at the end of the day, it's my name, right? Nobody sees that so-and-so edited my article to make it look like a listicle. So important things aren't covered. All of a sudden, here's an example from before we're invading Iraq. There was poor coverage of things before the war. A lot of news organizations disagreed with Bush that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and which, of course, we found that wasn't true. There's always bias in political views. It's always going to be that way. And people always believe the media that is biased and leans to one side, usually towards the one they aren't. So, for example, people might say the liberal scum New York Times, or they might say right-wing trash Fox News because they don't believe that side. And it's happening more than ever. News is created by rich men with clear political views. There was a paper that changed in the late 1800s, and newspapers lost their political edge so they wouldn't lose advertisers, and that's still true, except for opinionated news like Fox News and MSNBC. So besides these two organizations and other ones that you might know, most regular newspapers, magazines present from both sides. A study of newspapers and magazines found no bias and only a small amount of bias in network TV news. So what do you guys think? Is it bias? Is news bias, or could it do a better job? Sources. Stories are shaped by sources. These sources always have a name. This is another thing about writing articles. Do you want to give your name? Let's say theoretically we were in class and something happens right outside class and somebody's outside waiting to ask you what happened. Would you want to give your name? How many people would? A lot of people don't want to use a name, especially in breaking news. This is the hardest part. I usually ask a lot of people. So let's say that fire story that I showed you earlier, right? There's a crowd behind the police tape. I need to get information, people who are in those homes. This would happen to me all the time, and it would piss me off. I would speak to somebody for 20 minutes. Yes, he gives me all the information I need. I was in my house. I'd smelled some gas. At 11:59 p.m., I heard the first explosion. We ran. I left my dog. I heard another explosion. We got him. We left. The police told us the block was closed down. At the end of that, I need his name. I can't print his information without his name. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to give your name. I started to get smarter, and I would ask them, hey, were you there? Do you mind if I can interview you if you mind giving me your name? If not, there's 20 other people there. I'm going to ask somebody else. And you might notice this in other articles. They say, use my name. According to Fausto, who doesn't want to give his last name for fear of reprisal, that means that I live in a bad neighborhood or something like that. and I know somebody that could come and harm me, so I want to give information, but I don't want my name. You see this a lot in immigration stories because people can get deported if they use their last name, so they just use their first name. So, but not all are credible. It's determined by two terms. So, what's a credible source, right? We determine credible sources by one of two things: expertise, that means the source's ability to know facts, and by trustworthiness, willingness to tell facts accurately. So I disagree with the book on a point that the book made. The book says journalists don't know who are experts. I don't agree with that. I know who the experts were. I know that most of my coworkers know who the experts were. So who are the experts, right? For me, as a local reporter, as a breaking news reporter, the experts were community leaders. They were church pastors. They were local politicians at the state level, city council members, like state senators, things like that. They were the local people in the neighborhood. Maybe somebody who owned a store, who knows everybody, like a big business, a restaurant, or something. These people know everything that's going on. They know who wants to talk. They're always willing to help, and they know the background of it. Maybe they have some things that are not necessarily believable or that you have to check out, but these people will get you where you need to go. He's a very good organization that helped me when I worked in the Bronx, in the local papers, and helped me with my grad school thesis about the DREAM Act and an undocumented family. So this is my buddy Angelo Cabrera. He started this thing called MASA, which is basically an after-school tutoring center for Mexican kids, because the South Bronx has a huge population of Mexican people, and they struggle. Their parents are always working. They might not know English as well. So he said, you know what? I want to give educational opportunities to people. And also, he started workshops for the parents to understand things they may not have known. So he was always there. He's following the laws that change constantly for immigration affect the people, the students that he's with. So he's up to date on this. Also, writing. Imagine getting somebody to give their name is hard. Imagine somebody that could possibly be deported if they give their name. So it's hard. It's really hard to find undocumented immigrants who want to be quoted in stories. So Angelo, he made it really easy for me. He would just ask the parents, hey, is there anybody who wants to give their voice and speak about it? And I would find people. When it would take me, God knows how long to find somebody, he could find me somebody like in a day or two. So these are the experts. They know things that I might not be aware of. So is it true that journalists often use the same experts, same college professors and stories? So remember, there's timeline constraints, right? We might call the guy who's always going to answer the phone. So let's say I'm writing a story about immigration and I want to reach Angelo. He's really, he knows what's going on, especially related to Mexican concerns, but he doesn't call me back. So I have to go with the guy who's in every other newspaper, right? That's what happens. There's a deadline. Maybe I'll do the better job next time, but I have to go with what I go with. I can't lie. I can't make it up. I can't say Angelo said this. No, he didn't say it. You have to go with what you go with. That's why you might see the same thing. Going to TV news, they're horrible and experts, and they mostly use sounding boards. Here are two examples here. Fox News interviewed a fake expert on Sweden. Further baffles Swedes. I want to see if I can find the clip here. Basically, it was a guy who lied, but the other one, I'm going to show you the second one. It's funny. So, fake royal expert. With the royal wedding, some news organizations, hold on, let me pause it here. They interviewed a so-called royal expert. Let's watch this clip here. I think the sound is off.
If you think that's the most British he gets, just look at this actual photo of him. Taken, I assume, at the Alice in Wonderland wrap party, or in the year 1865, the only two times that outfit should be legal.
Last week tonight with John Oliver discussed Tommy Muscatello from New York, who fooled several media outlets into thinking he was a British royal wedding expert named Thomas J. Nace Archer Mills Esquire.
You're wanting to really upstage the Duchess of Cambridge and the future Queen? I won't have it.
John Oliver wasn't having it either, as Muscatello made him question his own Britishness.
If this guy isn't British, who the is? And I actually British? Well, let me reassure you, my parents are listed in my phone as Mr. and Mrs. Oliver, so I am definitely British.
Oliver pointed out that Muscatello's biggest mistake was that he went too British.
The name Thomas J. Mace Archer Mills Esquire, however, is offensively British. That is the equivalent of a British person pretending to be an American and calling themselves Jefferson Budweiser McNuggets Jr. It's actively racist.
Muscatello claimed he learned how to be British by taking online courses and befriending elderly British people that he referred to as his grandparents.
So apparently, he went to Europe, met an old lady, asked her to be his grandmother, and now he knows all about the monarchy. And if that sounds at all familiar to you, it's because it's literally the exact backstory of the Bar the Elephant.
Playing Monday morning quarterback, Oliver suggested Muscatello should have done what another famous fake British celebrity did.
If you really want to pull the wool over people's eyes, get a spot on The Daily Show, bide your time, perfect your stupid fake accents, and eventually land your own weekly program on HBO. Oh, have I said too much? Have I said too much?
All right, moving on. So in voting in balance in stories refers to the perception that the viewpoint has been presented equally. Most stories are about simple conflicts and just A and B. Others have more viewpoints. A study looked at articles that were about abortion, condoms in schools, and government bills. The study found that 48% were one-sided, meaning it had 3 elements for one and 1 element on the other side, and only 7% were completely balanced. What does that mean? That means that almost half of the stories that wrote about these topics. So if we're writing about abortion, maybe it had 3 who were pro-abortion and 1 that was anti-abortion. Maybe there was 3 that were pro-condoms in schools and 1 were anti-condoms in schools. Only 7% were completely, balanced. So a complete story. Are journalists telling us whole or part of the story? It doesn't seem like the intention of journalists is to mislead, but sometimes things happen. Again, recapping, you run out of time. You don't have enough sources, or they're an unexperienced journalist. Even though it is not intended, a partial story is still giving a distorted image. One example is when major stories are no longer covered in the news, even though things keep happening. For example, the news stopped covering the $21 billion tobacco settlement once it was reached. They failed to follow up and see where the money was going. The settlement was for anti-smoking efforts, but only 5% of that money actually went to it. So going forward, we have, I don't know, maybe you guys haven't got the stimulus checks. Some people are getting stimulus checks. There's a $2 trillion budget for the stimulus, right? A lot of that money is earmarked for corporations. In 2 years' time, in 1 year's time, who's going to follow up and see where that actual money went? Did it go to the wrong people? Did the corporations actually give it to the people? Did it enrich stockbrokers? Did they buy back their stocks at a lower price and make money in the long run? So let's see if the reporting happens there. And this happens all the time on a smaller level with crime. We have to cover this now, but they never follow up with the court cases, maybe when there's a final verdict. And again, that's because there's a short staff. I mean, back in the day, long before me, there's people who would sit on hearings every day, all day. Just go to court cases. Court cases can last weeks, months. They would just go there. I mean, when I had to cover court cases, even serious ones, they might send me, look at the budget, the schedule, and see who's presenting, or just send me for the verdict. All the juicy stuff and details get spilled out during the hearings. All those, if you watch these murder shows and things like on Netflix and document and true crime things, all those little juicy details are said during the hearing when they interview like a random person or whatever. And if we don't cover that as a reporter, we miss that unless we get the transcripts way later. Another way is providing full context. Journalists have to decide how much background information to include in an article. This helps the reader make sense of the article. Context can change. Sorry, guys, I'm getting sense. Can change a story. Think of the following, right? Let's look at this. Mr. Jones was arrested this morning for murder. Maybe Mr. Jones is your neighbor. And they just say that. The article says only that. They don't add the context. Mr. Jones murdered several people years ago, but was let out of jail on a technicality. That changes the story a whole lot. Another way, Mr. Jones is a candidate for mayor. That changes the story even more. So by leaving out the context, it's changing the story, and they need to include all context. Sorry for the typo there. is the most significant form of bias by journalists. Every story needs context. Even when the same story has appeared in a newspaper every day, it needs to be written as someone reading it for the first time. This is kind of annoying. If I'm writing the same updates to a story every day, I have to include the same thing. So let's look at crime stories. The book says crime stories rarely have context. I think this is wrong. Every time I wrote, and I know a lot of reporters who do this as well. Every time I wrote about a homicide, death, or other crime, I would include one line at the bottom summing up. Bridgeport has had 6 homicides so far this year, compared to 13 over the same period last year, to show you that even though this is a horrific crime, crime has actually gone down. The thing with crime is that crime is covered more because people always pay attention to it. Think about it. I don't know if I told you guys in class, if somebody got shot in the town versus a new cupcake shop opening up, which article are you more likely inclined to read? Crime rates have gone historically down, and unfortunately, we saw this with Trump. He called cities that said the crime was going up tremendously. That was wrong. It's horribly wrong, because the thing is, crime was bad. Why would all the quote-unquote hipster people move to the city, and why would gentrification be a thing if cities were so bad? Why would people want to move from the suburbs back to the city if it was crime-ridden? No, cities have gotten better. And let's look at this. This is the Uniform Crime Report put out by the FBI every year. It tells you statistics from 1985. I don't know if you guys are doing stories. This can help you. This is an excellent resource, and I always look at this. When this comes out, it's a big thing. So I already have it open here in another form, just to make it easier. So recently, I think in the last year or two, Trump has said something really negatively about Baltimore and their crime. So we have to look at when this first started keeping records, right? 1985. The level of, and you can play with this, any city, anywhere, time period. This is amazing, especially for a crime reporter or breaking news reporter. So violent crime is classified as homicides, rapes, robberies, or aggravated assault. And then we have more petty crimes, like getting your wallet stolen, pickpocketed, and things like that, property crimes. So in 1985, there were almost 7,000 violent crimes reported by the Baltimore City Police Department. And it's gone up until, we can see the actual number, 7,663. Cleared means they solved the cases, they know who did it, what happened. You can look for almost every city. It's gone way down. More than half of what it was. It was almost 8,000, and now it's gone to about less than 4,000. There's been a slight uptick, yes, but it's still nowhere near what it was during the heyday of crime in the late 80s, early 90s. So if you guys want to look at that, you can check any city. Let me see if I can do stuff. Let's do Nassau County, since that's where Hofstra is, really quickly. Oh, let's do Hempstead, because I think we can even break it down like that. Must have passed it. Here we go. Here we go. Let's see. Where's Hempstead? All right, let's check the Hempstead Police Department. Let's see what their stats are. Yeah, you see the tremendous decrease in crime. That's just overall trends. Crime has gone down everywhere. Boom. It was almost 900. The highest, the peak was 1996, 900. Now, 2 years ago, we're averaging about 300. All right, going back to the lesson. Almost done. Sorry, this is a long lesson. And it's a little longer for the video you have to watch at the end. So it takes a talented, why did I make myself bigger? I don't want to. Okay. It takes a talented and experienced journalist to dig and smoothly include all contextual information. It's hard in such a short time that you have to do it. Even if you have a long time to write a bigger story, it's hard. And meaning can change without it. So here's a story. Here's another example. A story on college athletes and dropout rates said that 50% of students at 6 schools that were in the NCAA dropped out. So what does that make you think? That these people are, that the college athletes are dropping out, half of them, right? But here's a very important thing they forgot to include, that the average rate of dropout for college students was 50%. So if the average rate of dropout for college students was 50%, there's no difference in the athletes. It's not a story. So standard of news, journalists use standard of credibility and balance. And as the audience, you know the knowledge structures and can examine it now that I explained it to you. So, all right, class, I want you to watch this video. It's a fairly long video. I think it's about 20 to 30 minutes, but it explains journalism. It's a very funny, like, mockery at the end. So tell me what you thought about this in the lesson. And I'll just open it here, so if you want to Google it instead of clicking on the link. And some of these things are infuriating when you see this. All right, look forward to seeing your discussions.